I'm super excited to have Kimberly. I've been following Kimberly for many years now, and I think what she's sharing in the world is super relevant for this time. And I'm over the moon to be having this conversation. So thank you for being here today, Kimberly.
Thanks for asking me.
So Kimberly is an award-winning sacred feminine activist and soul midwife. 20 years helping awakening women rebirth the feminine in themselves, their lives, and the world. Kimberley Jones is a spiritual mentor and wise woman who's come from a long lineage of intuitives and seers. Following her mother's passing in 1997, she experienced transformational mystical awakenings, initiating her as a feminine mystic, here to channel and share deeply rooted divine medicine for our awakening world. She was awarded Lightworker of the Year by Lightworker magazine, voted in the top 50 women's empowerment blogs, voted one of the top influencers in human potential on Twitter, and has her extraordinary journey of awakening featured in several books, as well as being the subject of psychological, paranormal, and spiritual research worldwide. Coming from a long line of highly intuitive, clairvoyant, and clairsentient women, Kimberly is described as a real-life spirit guide and a soul midwife for our awakening world. Yay!
Blimey, that'll sum it up. Thank you, love. Thank you.
So tell us, I want to hear more about what led you to do the work that you do today. I really would like to hear more about your story.
Yeah, well, as you mentioned in the intro, I come from a long line of intuitives, empaths, clairvoyants. Grew up watching my mum read tarot and my grandnan teach her how to read tea leaves. But I was very aware from a really young age that there was a lot of fear around their gifts. They were reluctant to be open about it. It was all behind closed doors. My mum was the local hairdresser. When she had children, she moved her business from home. So I grew up with a house full of mainly women coming and going, sitting in a chair, my mum doing their hair, but being the counsellor, as many hairdressers are, great listeners, great counsellors. And she was bringing that mediumistic and that spirituality, those gifts to that job as a hairdresser. So I saw and sensed her doing that work. But her message to me was always, it's a curse, it's not a blessing. I don't want you to do this work. I don't want, it was drummed into me all through my childhood, even though I was seeing spirits myself, communicating with other realms from a really young age, reading people's energy, knew what people were thinking and feeling from a really young age. And so fast forward a few years, she became really unwell and she lived with cancer for 11 years. And when she sadly died in 1997, a few weeks later, I had what I now know is actually quite common in lineages of certain types of clairvoyance and mediums. I had an ancestral download of unused gifts, suppressed power, but it was all mixed in with the grief, the loss, trauma that I didn't know that I had at the time from childhood, abuse, and the collective trauma that we're all becoming more aware of. And so that download triggered a Kundalini crisis, a spiritual emergency, a sudden awakening, a dark night of the soul, and ultimately just a complete breakdown of my life, massive transformation. And at the time, I had no context for that kind of process, so I didn't know what was happening. So as a result, I lost my job. Then my partner lost his job, lost my home, moved house several times. Bit by bit, my body also started to break down, and I became immobilized and really unwell. And it took a couple of years for that steady decline, and the doctors didn't really know what was going on. I was very careful, actually. I was guided very strongly by spirit not to reveal too much of the more extreme experiences that I was having, to the doctor. I didn't know why at the time. I understand why now. I was told it was a spiritual experience. Trust the process. Trust the process. But there I was in my late 20s, out of work, sick, in bed most of the time, lost my mum, thinking I'm going crazy. And I was flicking through a local Mind, Body, Spirit magazine and found a healer that was nearby, a Reiki healer. I'd never heard of Reiki then, 1999 this would have been. And I had that first Reiki session and everything changed. Almost overnight, everything changed. So I went from this darkness, this fear, and I describe it as the moment my world went pink, because the divine feminine energy came in really strongly through the healing. I didn't really know what that meant then, but the healer said that she'd had this huge visitation from this divine feminine gathering of deities, of female deities, as she was preparing to do my healing. And my experience, I think, was that energy coming in for me from that moment onwards, and sort of setting me on that path. Again, I didn't really have the language for it then. I didn't know that was some kind of sacred feminine awakening or whatever. It was just that the air went pink and I felt different, and I started to get better. And as many people watching will probably relate to, from that moment on, it was just this kind of synchronistic free fall of magical books being lent to me and finding my way to the next teacher. And I ended up training with a Canadian shaman and learning how to really manage my energy and master my energy, and working with, because I was telepathic, I had remote viewing, I was astrally traveling, I was lucid dreaming, but it was all spontaneous. So she helped me sort of discipline that. Yeah. And then by 2004, I was ready to set up in private practice, working in a complementary therapy centre that was run by a doctor at the time, doing Reiki and intuitive guidance. And I realised I was seeing things in women's energy and common themes. Tens of thousands of women in the end, and observing common themes in this process of awakening, embodiment, and identifying various feminine wounds that were stored in the body that were manifesting as holding them back in their lives. And for various reasons, I left the clinic and started working from home online, and so then everything expanded to more of a global reach. And then I had a few years off for health reasons, and now I'm being called back out again, so that brings me to now.
Yeah, well, and that kind of leads me into my next question, because one of the main things that I see you working with and what's coming through is you talk a lot about sacred feminine activism. So what is that?
So up until now, it's been very much about that personal level of empowering women on a one-to-one basis, healing their own feminine wounds and supporting them on their process of awakening and coming down into the body and feeling what's there to be felt, connecting with their gifts, their purpose, their pain. In these times, it makes perfect sense that has shifted and expanded into more of a collective global perspective of us living in the death throes of patriarchy now. And this message that I keep getting now is to gather all of that experience, all of those tools, and all of that wisdom that all of the women that have been working on themselves and healing and awakening these past years, and bringing them together in a really focused way to get ready. And so I was asking, get ready for what, and it's to midwife or hold space for the crumbling of patriarchy, and then midwife the return of the goddess, and the return of the values and the ideals and the way of being and the way of living, community, social justice, equality, compassion, sacred ritual, connection to the land, connection to the divine, sitting in circle. So bringing all that personal healing and growth and awakening that we've been doing now in service in a wider way, beginning with personal leadership, of course, embodying it and living it, but then looking at okay, how can we get ready in the coming years to really serve? Because when patriarchy crumbles, it's going to leave one heck of a vacuum. And we know nature abhors a vacuum. And I feel women are being prepared as you carry this feminine energy. It's not necessarily specific to gender, but it tends to be those who've embodied as women who are carrying these codes of this next age. Because I'm really aware that I'm birthing it now. You know, it's coming through me, and every day I'm getting other bits dropping in, and it's unfolding and evolving. And I'm not an expert in any one of the areas that are being presented to me, but I'm birthing it, and I'm open to learning and growing and seeing how sacred feminine activism is intersectional. I'm really at the beginning of unpacking my white privilege and exploring how this sacred feminine path fits into that bigger picture. I'm really committed to teaching from my own experience and being rooted in what I know authentically from my own lived experience. So there are amazing women out there working with all sorts of different elements of the feminine wound and the feminine wounds. The ones that I've experienced are to do with what again, it came in from spirit about 22 years ago. I've named the witch wound.
Yeah.
Excuse me, a lot of people know me from that work.
That's actually that's how I found you, was the healing the witch wound. Yeah.
And of course, as I shared at the beginning, I realized I kind of grew up in a cauldron of the witch wound, in a soup of the witch wound, with my mum being afraid of her gifts, with my nan, her mum, very much afraid and completely trying to block and suppress her gifts, and my grandnan as well, behind closed doors, yes, but all three of them I witnessed experiencing abuse of different kinds, or knew of them experiencing abuse of different kinds because of their power. And then when I started working with women in the clinic that I mentioned and scanning their energy fields, there was one pattern that kept coming up, and it seemed to surface just as they were about to step up, or asking questions about what's my purpose, or they wanted to write a book, or they'd had an invitation to speak, or something that was really moving them to the next step in their growth and breaking out of the life that they'd been living, a growth moment. And they would often come to me saying the same things: I feel stuck, I feel blocked, I get so far and I can't go any further, or this fear comes up, or I feel this constriction around my throat and I can't speak, just this dread, this fear, almost fear of death. And they would say it feels completely irrational. They thought they were crazy, but it felt like they were going to die. And many of them in the healing room with me were starting to have flashbacks and memories of burning alive, or being hanged, or being killed, and the burning times of the witch trials and so on. And of course, the crumbling of patriarchy, for me, represents a major turning point in the healing of that.
Yeah.
Because the witch wound isn't just of those times. The witch wound presents itself in many areas of society now that affect women now.
Yeah. So is there any other like feminine wound layers that are a common theme in women that you work with?
Well, I distill it down to three things: bitch, witch, whore.
That's great.
So you get the gist. So yeah, it's about reclaiming those words, really, and reclaiming those powers. A lot of women find their way to me ready to really heal those feminine wounds when they hit burnout.
Yeah.
So they're often burnt out because they've been overgiving, people pleasing, self-abandoning, putting other people's needs and wants before their own.
It's like, so as you said, we are starting to see the crumbling of patriarchy. So what is it that's like, what is your message to the audience, and like how we can really tap into getting ready for this time?
I would say it's about learning how to get really grounded and really rooted and really earthed and really centered and really calm, and how to process your emotions. And particularly for women, really dropping into your body and listening to yourself and trusting yourself, really taking good care of yourself. So many women are going to be called into leadership to create the new world, and there's a real feeling of needing to be ready.